Share my screen. Okay. Thank you all for joining us for this special workshop with Jenny Sanchez. My name is Maura Mencher, and I am part of the organizing team for the conference made possible by Garnet Health, the Orange County Youth Bureau, and the Orange County Child Care Council. Before we begin, I would like to familiarize you guys briefly with the features here on Zoom. When you are not looking to say something in this meeting, we ask you to mute yourself to ensure optimal sound quality for all. You are welcome to leave your video on if you'd like. The video on and off and the mute button can be found on the bottom of the screen as a mic or camera icon. If you have questions during the presentation, you can put those in the chat and we will be sure to respond there or during the interactive parts of the workshop. You can also show your appreciation or support of what you hear by using the emoji features, which should also be at the bottom of your screen. Lastly, depending on the device you are joining us from, you can choose your view so that you can see multiple people on your screen in a gallery, or you can choose from speaker in speaker view. Finally, please be aware that the session will be recorded. Also, please put your name in the chat if you would like to receive continuing education credits. We will provide a link at the end of the program that will allow you to receive these credits. Now, it's my honor to introduce our workshop leader, Jenny Sanchez, to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jenny Sanchez, and I am the Grants and Mental Health Program Manager for Sullivan 180. Thank you all for attending this conference and this workshop. If you're not familiar with Sullivan 180, we provide trainings and education and support to our community partners and Sullivan County residents to make Sullivan County a healthier place to live, work, play, and raise a family. Through my role, I identify and apply for funding opportunities that promote health and wellness, including mental health. And then the other part of my role is to lead workshops such as this. And I am also a suicide prevention instructor, as well as a youth mental health first aid instructor.
Thank you, Jenny. We would like to begin the workshop by showing a 9-minute video which features several young people who participate in a program called Act for Change. This conference aims to center the voices of young people like the ones on the video, as we want to hear about some of their concerns, experiences, hopes, aspirations, and the actions they hope to take to help to create a livable future for them. After the video, Jenny will proceed with her presentation. And I'm going to begin the video now.
We are in a state of emergency. Black people are dying in a state of emergency. We cannot look at this as an isolated incident.
Jenny, are you hearing the video?
No, I'm not.
Okay. I think we're experiencing some technical difficulty around the video. So if anybody is interested in learning more about the Act for Change program, please indicate that on the evaluation and we will post it at the end of the session. I will pass the mic over to Jenny now, who will share how her work supports youth in what they have experienced. Jenny.
Thank you, Maura. I'm going to share my screen now. And so this is Intro to Mental Health and Wellness for those who work with youth. I also provide this for parents, so there is a lot of overlap in the material provided. So by the end of this workshop today, you will have a working definition of mental health, mental illness, and trauma. You will also learn person-first language to destigmatize mental illness, identify signs and symptoms for mental health challenges, as well as traumatic stress responses. Learn about resources available to you and your children or students you work with. Understand the importance of mental wellness and self-care as well. So first I'd like to ask, and I'd like to open this up to the audience, what comes to mind when you think of mental health, or I say mental health? What do you picture? What pops into your head? And feel free, if you want to participate, to drop it in the chat or unmute yourself, or you could press the space bar and briefly unmute yourself to speak. If you want to suggest something, even if it's a word, feel free. Oh, thank you, Clarissa. Varying diagnoses such as anxiety, etc. Yes, that's right. Thank you. Susie, mental wellness. Thank you. There's not just one side of mental health. I like that you both identify different parts of mental health. Thank you for that. So here today, we're going to use the World Health Organization's definition, which is mental health is defined as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes their own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to their community. I like this definition because it changes the perception of mental health from just being mental illness to being integral to your overall health. It's a part of your health, just like your physical health is, and it's not stagnant. It's not just being mentally well or having a diagnosed mental health condition. There's this continuum of wellness, and how well somebody can change. It can fluctuate just like your physical health can. Some days you may have you may be feeling better. Some days you might be feeling worse. You might develop a short-term cold and be able to treat it with a prescription and antibiotics, something short-term, and then it goes away. Or you may just need some rest and some nutrition, and then you feel better. Similarly with your mental health, you can feel low one day or a few days, but then you get better if a situation changes, or if you feel better in the spring and you notice that you feel depressed or down during the winter seasons as it gets darker and the days seem a bit shorter. So we want to bring that definition into this workshop and provide that foundation as we go through this today. So let's explore next what mental health and being mentally well can look like. And think about this as we apply it to ourselves and to our youth especially. Are you seeing mental wellness over the course and coming through the coronavirus pandemic? Or are some of these things like personal growth, has that been stagnant for some of the youth that you're around every day? Are they engaging in positive and healthy relationships? Are the youth able to identify and self-regulate their emotions? How are their communication skills? Are they able to articulate what they're feeling, what they're experiencing? Or are there a lot of misunderstandings? Is communication a barrier, a challenge as you're working with youth, trying to communicate with them in your everyday work? How are their problem solving and decision making skills? Are they able to work through solutions? Are they able to set goals? Are they optimistic? Are they hopeful about the future? Are they motivated? Or are they feeling maybe hopeless, where they're not seeing a future, they're not seeing that next step, what's in store for them, because maybe what's going on inside of them or around them isn't looking too hopeful right now. So as part of mental health, we also need to identify what is a mental illness. So we like to use the American Psychiatry Association's definition. Mental illnesses are health conditions involving changes in emotion, thinking, or behavior, or a combination of them. And mental illnesses are associated with distress and or problems functioning in social, work, or family activities. A mental illness is identified when it begins impacting your ability to cope with the stressors of your day-to-day life. And that's when we see people hopefully seeking treatment for this. And we'll go through in a moment some of the barriers why somebody might not seek treatment. So first, before we move on to the next question I have for you, I want to touch on how common mental illnesses are in children. Statistically, 1 in 5 children and youth across the United States is diagnosed with a mental illness or has a diagnosable mental health condition. And we also see that that 50% of the first signs of a mental illness show up in children and youth by the age of 14, and 75% show up by age 24. So that alone is critical for why we would want to be able to look at the warning signs and identify if a child or an adolescent is struggling, is showing these signs and symptoms, so that we can help somebody get into treatment if they need, get connected with community resources, get the help that they need so that this doesn't go on untreated. And so with that as a basis, and with that statistic of 1 in 5 children has a diagnosable mental health condition, what would you say is the median delay between the onset of symptoms of a mental illness and the first time somebody receives treatment? Again, please feel free to drop it in the chat or unmute yourself. Any guess is fine. Some people guess a number of months, some people guess years. And if you've seen this question before and you know the answer, please feel free to say it as well. Thank you, Susie. Yeah, that's a hard one. Yes, I will say it is years. But how many years? Anybody have any guesses? Seeing some answers coming in. 3. I'm seeing Amanda, thank you, 1 to 5 years. Clarissa, 2 to 3. So thank you for for your for your input. It is actually 10 years is the median delay between the onset of symptoms of a mental illness and the first time somebody receives treatment. Yeah, that's a long time. And so next we're going to explore why that is. Because if you equate this to a physical illness and you think, oh wow, somebody sees the first signs of the symptoms, or they experience the first symptoms of let's say diabetes, a chronic health condition, and then instead of getting treated right away or within the first year, that condition goes on for 10 years. Their symptoms are going to look very different from somebody who received treatment and is being maintained or is recovering from their health condition right away, and somebody who receives that early intervention versus somebody who has their symptoms festering, getting worse. And so that's a big number. That's a long time. That's a full decade for somebody to wait. And so I want to go over why that could be. Think about the community in which you live, what goes on around you, the youth that you're seeing. Why might somebody not receive or seek treatment right away? And again, don't be afraid to, if you're thinking, oh, I might give a wrong answer, it's totally fine. We're exploring, we're learning this together. If you want to drop it in the chat or share just any of the barriers to seeking treatment, what might stop somebody? You look at the image on screen. It's an image of presumably a female, possibly who has their finger in front of their lips. They're being muted. They're not able to talk. The image itself, we relate it to stigma. Mental health stigma is huge in families, in communities, in the media, in culture. It's the fear of being judged, that somebody is going to think you're different from them, that they won't understand, that somebody might not like them or be their friend anymore if they have a mental illness. And so that's just one barrier, but it's a huge barrier. 2 out of 3 youth suffer in silence because of stigma. And so that's one thing we're talking about here today, is how can we listen without judgment? How can we be a trusted adult in this youth's life and remove some of that stigma, remove some of the stigmatizing language, and reframe our choice of words so that we can show that they can come to us, that we're not going to look down on them, judge them, even if some people around them might, but we'll be that person that's in their corner that can help them and connect them to appropriate resources if they're experiencing some of the warning signs. Any other barriers come to mind? If not, I can go into them as well. Just give you another moment if you want to say anything. Thank you, Susie. Not knowing how to get help. That's a barrier. If someone's not sure of how to access help, not sure of the resources out there, what's available in my community, who can I call? How do I access it? How do I take that first step? And then especially if it's a young person and they may be thinking, I don't know how to get help. I don't think I can get help on my own, but I don't really know who to turn to. There can also be other barriers in your community, such as transportation. There can be waiting lists if you access help, and then there's a long waiting list. So that can be pretty discouraging. Or the local providers who can get you an appointment sooner. What if they don't take your insurance? So those are some barriers within a community. Thank you, Clarissa. Families' beliefs about mental health. That's a barrier as well, is, oh, we don't speak with a therapist about that, or, oh, mental illness, that's not real. It's all in your head, or, oh, you're just being a teenager. This is just part of your regular development. It's just hormones. It's just, you're just giving me attitude. You're just acting out. It might not be identified as a mental illness. And when we're talking about family, another big piece of information for that is undiagnosed or untreated parental mental illness. When someone is experiencing signs and symptoms and they may not be in treatment, and it may just be ongoing within the house, that normalizes the situation for a child where, oh, well, my mom is doing the same thing, so it must be normal. I must be okay. They may not realize that it's something to seek help for. And so those are a lot of the barriers, but there are others I'm sure that come to mind as well. So thank you for your input. And just going back for a moment to stigma. These are some phrases you may have heard or you may have said before, may have heard other people say. You may have heard other youth that you work with say some of these things as well. Stop being so paranoid. Oh, I'm so OCD. He committed suicide. Oh, she's acting so bipolar, to describe somebody who may be experiencing some mood swings. Oh, just get over it already. Similarly, with that last one, a lot of youth hear things like, oh, you think that's a problem? Just wait until you're older. Then you'll really have issues. Or, oh, that's just your first breakup. Please, by the time you go through college or by the time you're an adult, oh, you'll have so many more. It's fine. Just get over it. Just deal with it. It's not that big of a deal. A lot of these statements are minimizing how a person is feeling. And it can make a young person feel like they're not comfortable talking or sharing what's going on because the way they're experiencing life, the way they're experiencing their challenges are being minimized. They don't feel heard or validated. And also, when you look at some of these statements, I'm so OCD, she's acting so bipolar, and so on. There are so many more. There's more on here on this slide as well. When you talk about a diagnosis, we want to use person first language. We don't want to generalize a diagnosis because it is serious. And when people are diagnosed with it, we don't want there to be confusion, because when terms are so generalized, like I'm so OCD, and they're really describing themselves as being organized or tidy, versus somebody who has a condition that they seek mental health treatment for, or calling somebody by their diagnosis, oh, he's a schizophrenic, versus looking at it as this is a person living with schizophrenia, or another diagnosis, if you really need to share about it, is removing the diagnosis from the person and labeling it as their full identity. Because when you say, oh, he's a schizophrenic, it kind of becomes, well, that's their identity, versus they're a person living with this. Similarly to a person with a physical illness, and you say, oh, this is somebody who has cancer or is going through fill in the blank, we take that step to remove them because they have so many more traits and talents and strengths and things that they are great at. And we want to highlight that with our youth and empower them and show them, okay, you may be experiencing a mental illness or mental health challenges, and we want to support you through that. But we also want to highlight that you're so much more than that too, that there are all these other aspects to who you are. And so, yes, the words we choose do matter. And every step we can take to reduce some of that stigma that youth experience, it matters. So when somebody is experiencing a mental health challenge or a mental illness, how does this impact the students, the youth that we're working with? In a school setting, we see lower grades. We see a higher dropout rate. We see a higher rate of absenteeism, a lack of concentration and focus, and a decreased ability to create lasting relationships. These are just some of the impacts that we see and that have been studied. And in this, we can equate this to adulthood. When a youth has an undiagnosed or an untreated mental illness, and that's might appear, let's say, by 14, and they're starting to see and exhibit some of those first signs and symptoms, but they don't receive treatment or they don't seek treatment. And it could be because of any number of barriers that we identified before. As that child becomes an adult, we see a decreased ability to have lasting relationships in adulthood, a decreased ability to make adult friends, build up a support network. And we know that a strong social network is one of the protective factors for our youth, for people in general, that really helps support their mental health. We also see a higher rate of absenteeism translate from school to work. We see a lower retention rate for jobs. And so, as if this isn't caught early, treated early, it has lasting, lingering effects into adulthood. So thinking about the barriers that we talked about and what could help prevent somebody from seeking treatment. And then we talk about the impact that it has on our youth. Then we need to look at risk and protective factors. Biologically, environmentally, and individually, what helps to create or prevent a problem? And we look at risk factors for what helps create a mental health challenge, protective factors, what helps reduce the risk of a mental health challenge, what can help somebody become more resilient. And we look at their early experiences. We look at biologically their genetics, their brain chemistry and structure. We look at their hormone levels. We look at environmental factors such as their early experiences. Were they nurturing? Were they supportive? Were they loving? Were they cared for? Or was it the opposite? Are there a lot of risk factors in that area? Were their early experiences negative? Was there abuse or instances of neglect or malnourishment? What did they experience and how is that impacting them? Stressful events. How many stressful events has this child experienced in their life so far? Is it a few? Is it a lot? What's the parent-child relationship like? Is the child's parents, are their parents involved in their life? Are they being raised by a guardian, a grandparent, somebody else? Have their parents, have their caretakers been consistent in their life? Have they been good role models? Have they been somebody that this child can look up to and follow an example of? What's the parent's mental health like? And we talked about that a little bit already. Is there underlying mental illness? Is it being treated? Is it not being treated? School context. We all know that's been huge since March of 2020. And we look at, well, was the child being bullied? Maybe coming back into school in person, they were afraid to go back. Maybe home was a safe place for them. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe school was a reprieve from what they were experiencing at home. How are they doing with their academics? How do they feel about how they're doing? Do they feel motivated? Do they feel like coming back to school is good for them? How are their social skills after going remote for so long? So there's a lot to unpack in just the school context alone that can be considered risk or protective factors. And then individually, what is this individual youth's temperament like? What's their communication skill level? Think about the slide that we went through before on what being mentally well and mentally healthy looked like. How are their communication skills? Are they optimistic? Are they motivated about the future? Sense of humor is huge as well. That's a big coping skill that can help children deal with what's going on around them, what they're experiencing, if they're able to laugh through some situations or brush things off and use that as a coping mechanism. Are they able to regulate their own emotions? Are they able to calm themselves down when they get upset, frustrated? Or is that something they are struggling with and may need some assistance? And the more risk and protective factors somebody has, the more particularly with risk factors, the more likely it is somebody is going to develop a mental health challenge or a mental illness. And so we look at how many of each of these a child has, one way or the other, for risk or protective. So we're actually going to spend a couple minutes on this slide and the next slide, because these are the warning signs and symptoms for mental illness in elementary age children and adolescents. And you'll notice that many of them overlap, and some of the ones in elementary school, like hyperactive behavior, frequent nightmares, disobedience, aggression, frequent temper tantrums, those are more behavioral, where you see maybe somebody is really hyper, or they're having frequent temper tantrums where they might not have been before. And that's because the younger the child is, the best way they know how to express what they're going through, what they're experiencing, what they're feeling, is behaviorally. They may not be able to articulate, yes, I am feeling frustrated in this situation because, or I'm feeling very anxious and I don't know why. It's impacting my school life, going to bed. I'm afraid for the next day and I don't really know why. So it might come out in behaviors that seem out of the ordinary for the child that you're working with. What we look at when we look at signs and symptoms for mental illness and for traumatic stress responses is, one, the duration. How long is this happening for? Is it a 1 or 2 time thing? Or is this child experiencing this for 2 or more weeks? How severe is it? How out of this child's normal behavior is this sign or symptom? And we look at how many of these signs and symptoms the child is experiencing or exhibiting. So for elementary age children, we look at changes in school performance. Have their grades dropped for 1 or 2 assignments? Then we might think, okay, maybe the child didn't understand that module or that lesson. Maybe they need some extra support. Or are their grades across the board plummeting over 2 weeks or more? How drastic is it? Were they getting A's before and now they're getting C's or D's? So we look at that. We look at excessive worry or anxiety coming out as they might possibly be fighting to avoid bed or school. And if you're not their parent, you might not know that they're fighting to avoid bed or school, but maybe you'll see that they are more tired and they're very withdrawn. They might be exhausted, hyperactive behavior, frequent nightmares. You might see frequent disobedience, aggression, and temper tantrums, as stated before. In adolescence, we look at persistent sadness, persistent meaning 2 or more weeks, withdrawing socially. Our youth have already had to be socially isolated for a while, so they're working on getting their social skills back. But are they withdrawing into themselves more from their friend group, from any clubs, activities, sports? What are you seeing? Is it something that you're noticing and you're thinking, okay, I'm a bit concerned about this, because maybe you're listening to this and you have a certain youth in mind and you're starting to put some of the pieces together. Outbursts or extreme irritability, out of control behavior that can be harmful. So think of substance use issues or other risk-taking behaviors. And so they might be fighting. Drastic changes in mood, behavior, or personality, something that seems very unlike them, something drastic. Changes in their eating habits. Are you around them when they're eating? Are they eating a lot more than usual? Or maybe they're skipping meals or eating just a few bites and that's becoming a habit? Are you noticing visible weight loss in this youth? Are they having difficulty sleeping? Are they complaining about frequent headaches or stomach aches? Maybe they need to go to the nurse's office often. That can be anxiety manifesting in a physical way. The youth may have difficulty concentrating on the lesson, on conversations, in activities that you're trying to do with them. They may also have changes in academic performance. They may be avoiding or missing school. If you're in the education field, think about how your attendance has been. Think back to how it was in 2019, and then since then, as we've gone through the pandemic. And then the last two, we're going to spend a whole slide on next. Hurting oneself, or talking about hurting oneself, or talking about death or suicide, because these are very serious symptoms, and we want to be aware of what that would look like. So for self-harm and suicide specifically, let's talk for a moment about self-harm and what it is, and why somebody might self-harm and engage in self-harming behaviors. I want you to think now about a pot of boiling water on the stove, and you have the lid on, and it's boiling up. You don't want it to boil over, so you lift the lid just a little bit and releases some steam. The water starts to calm down, so you put the lid back on. You might do that occasionally if you want to keep the heat up, but you don't want it to boil over. That's what self-harm is like for a lot of people. It is that release valve, that pressure release when somebody is experiencing this tornado of emotions inside of them, and it needs an outlet, it needs a release, and somebody either doesn't know what else to do to release it. They may turn to self-harm because they may, one, not be aware of a healthier coping skill or way to handle what they're experiencing. Their healthier coping skills may not be working for the amount of pain and myriad of emotions they're feeling. They may want to show you their distress, and the way they do that is by self-harming. They may also self-harm as a way to punish themselves, which usually is a result of past trauma they've experienced. And so those are some of the reasons somebody may self-harm. And I want to note here, because we do have self-harm and suicide on the same slide, that when somebody engages in self-harm, they generally do not do so as an attempt for suicide. It can result in accidental death if somebody harms themselves to the point of fatality. And some of the warning signs that you might notice are scars, fresh cuts, burns, scratches, or bruises on oneself. Self-harm is not just cutting oneself with a razor or a sharp object. It's burning oneself. It can be scratching oneself, picking at scabs to reopen them. It can include rubbing your skin, like your wrists or your forearms together to create friction for a burn. And it can include pulling your hair out. It can include hitting one's head or other body part hard against another surface, a desk, a wall, a floor. And so another warning sign is impulsive and unstable behavior, experiencing difficulties with relationships. If you notice the child or youth you're working with has blood stains on their bedding, clothing, towels, or tissues, If they have sharp objects in their possession, it doesn't have to be a razor. Think about everyday objects that can be made sharp, like an unbent paper clip or a staple, things like that. Spending long periods of time alone, often in the bathroom or bedroom. Increased isolation and social withdrawal. Avoiding situations in which they need to reveal a lot of skin. Wearing long sleeves or long pants, even in hot weather. This tends to be one of the warning signs that people know the most. And then also saying that they feel helpless, hopeless, or worthless. And so those are some of the warning signs to keep in mind that somebody may be engaging in self-harming behaviors. And then at the end, we will go over ways you can help. So I'm not just going to leave you with all of this information and then you're asking, well, what do I do after this? We'll go over that as well. And now I want to talk about the warning signs of suicide. And I also want to note here that these are not all inclusive warning signs. And if you want to learn more about suicide prevention, I do offer QPR. It's an evidence-based suicide prevention training. I offer that for free. So feel free to follow up with me, reach out to me through sullivan180.org, and I'd be happy to go over that training with you and your group, whether it's a school or your organization. And so this is not all inclusive, but some of the key warning signs of suicide are talking or writing about death. This can be indirect or direct because people don't generally and say to other people, oh, I'm going to kill myself. And it doesn't usually come out directly. Now, sometimes with youth, I have experienced this in my work where youth will joke around with each other. I'm just going to kill myself if this doesn't happen. And then they just kind of laugh it off. It's a joke to them. And so I have pulled youth aside and said, hey, I noticed that you've made this statement. I have to ask, are you thinking of killing yourself? And generally the answer that I get is, no, I was only joking. I was only playing. It wasn't serious. But I want to ask anyways. I always take that seriously, and I encourage you to as well, because when somebody makes a concerning statement like that, we can't guarantee unless we ask them about their intentions. We can't guarantee that that's not them giving a clue to the people around them that they're struggling and that they're contemplating suicide. And so I'll go into this a little bit more at the end as far as what you can do if somebody is sharing or exhibiting signs of suicide. But if you want to know a step-by-step intervention for anybody 16 and older, I encourage you to schedule or attend one of my other workshops for that. An indirect way somebody may be talking about suicide and making a suicide attempt is by saying something like, oh, I'm not going to be around here much longer. Oh, what's the point anyways? I won't be here. Oh, it doesn't matter. I won't be here by Tuesday. Oh, I just wish I could go to sleep and never wake up. Concerning statements, and that may send up a red flag if you're hearing somebody say these things. Or if you see them writing about death. Feeling hopeless and withdrawing socially. As you'll notice, some of these warning signs from the last slide and then both sides of this slide, some of these overlap. And that's why we want to take all signs seriously, because until we have that conversation and speak with the youth or child, we don't fully know what's going on in their head. or where they're at. But if they're feeling hopeless, they're withdrawing socially from those around them. That is a cause for concern. Increased substance use or other risk-taking behaviors. We highlight increased substance use specifically and separately from just an increase in risk-taking behaviors, because when somebody is contemplating suicide and they may be feeling hopeless, they may be feeling so much pain that the only way out that they see is suicide. Suicide isn't the problem, it's the perceived solution to a problem they can't find a way out of. And so increased substance use, that's risky. That's a warning sign, because we naturally as humans have self-preservation. It's built into us, it's part of us. And so even when somebody makes the decision and makes a plan to go through with a suicide attempt, they're at the last moment, you have inhibitions about that because it's not natural for us. And so because our self-preservation instincts kick in. But if somebody is utilizing substances, that lowers our inhibitions. That makes a suicide attempt ends up being more fatal. And it also means that somebody is more likely to go through with it because they lower their inhibitions. If someone is giving away their personal possessions, their prized possessions, we want to know, why would somebody be doing that? If that's something important to you, why would you be giving it away? So it should start our minds thinking about that, start the wheels turning. Increase in risk-taking behaviors, or if somebody is experiencing delusions or hallucinations, that's a warning sign as well. Significant change in mood or change in school performance. Those are huge and they could go either way. What I mean by that is typically people think of somebody thinking about suicide or contemplating suicide, and that you would notice somebody becoming more depressed. That may be true. You may see a significant change that way in their mood and how they're feeling. But not everybody knows that you may also see a significant change in mood the opposite way. If somebody's been depressed for a long period of time, and then all of a sudden they come to school, they come to the group that you're leading, whatever it is that you are engaging with them in, and all of a sudden they look cheerful, happy, relieved, that's a cause for concern too. Because if somebody is feeling that amount of pain and they're not seeing another way out of that pain, they're not seeing any motivation or any hope for that things will get better for them, and they make a plan and decide to die by suicide, we want to take note of that, because their mood, because they may feel relief from that plan, from knowing their pain, their suffering will be over soon. And so it's like this huge weight off their shoulders. And so we take note of that. And we also take note of a change in school performance. Their grades may be continuing to drop, or they might get better at the end. And this really depends on how the person wants to be remembered. Do they want to be remembered as a student who got D's, or do they want to be known as somebody who tried more at the end, who did better, who made it to that next percentile? And perception is big. How do they want to be remembered? Tying in with that is knowing someone who died by suicide increases your risk as well. How does the youth know somebody who died by suicide, and do they know how that person died? Because they're more likely to attempt in the same way. Also, if somebody in their school dies by suicide, we see an increase in the risk for more students to die by suicide following that, based on how was their death memorialized? How much attention did this receive? How did people grieve for this individual? And so that plays into this risk as well. So the next part of this presentation is talking about child trauma. And we bring this up in relation to the coronavirus pandemic because this was a collective trauma that we all have experienced. And that's not to say that everybody who has been affected globally by COVID-19 has a diagnosis suddenly of post-traumatic stress disorder. It means that we've all experienced something deeply disturbing outside of our normal lives, outside of what we expect to occur. It's something that's deeply upsetting. It can be life-threatening. It can be very frightening for children especially. And this is really an injury to your brain that your brain has to figure out now how to heal from it. And when you're thinking about children, and you see behaviors after coming back to school from being remote for so long and going through COVID-19, or experiencing anything on this image that's on your screen right now: bullying, school violence, active terrorism, community violence, injuries, abuse, crime, discrimination, violence within the family, homelessness, poverty, loss of a loved one, cyberbullying, fires, racism, neglect, serious illness. Trauma encompasses so many different things. And when you look at the video at the end of this that we tried to play in the beginning, you'll notice some of these themes as well, and what can be considered a traumatic event for a child, and what some of the youth in the video have pledged to do about that, and how they've pledged to make change in regards to racism and discrimination that they've seen, that they're aware of, that they've experienced themselves. And so I want to point out that trauma is highly individual, and two children could have experienced the same event, same exact way. They could have been in the same car in the same accident, and they will both walk away with different takeaways from that, different experiences, different levels and signs and symptoms of trauma, because of those risk and protective factors that we talked about before for their mental health, because of their own family dynamics, because of their own level of resilience. And the behaviors that come out of that, the signs, the symptoms that you see the youth that you work with go through, those are the best way that children know how to show you what they've been through, what they're experiencing, how their brain is still trying to process what happened to them because it wasn't expected. It wasn't part of their normal life. And so this, as we work with more and more children who have experienced adverse childhood experiences or child trauma or toxic stress, we look at the signs, the symptoms. We start to pick up on what they're exhibiting to us, and we can start to make connections on, oh, you're saying this, and I was just working with a youth 2 days ago who is exhibiting this, and about a year ago they experienced this, they went through this, and that was really hard for them. I wonder if they're still dealing with everything, that the repercussions of that and more. So they may still be healing from that. So I'm going to touch on this. I spend a lot of time just on adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. And if you get the chance to see resilience, it's in many counties. We're just starting to distribute this film across all different sectors in Sullivan County. Resilience is a great film on adverse childhood experiences, and really so much of the work that this conference and the conference creators are already doing. So I hope that you're already all familiar with this and the study and the outcomes, because it has shaped so much work since this study came out. And as we look at what we can do to prevent problems for our children and how we can support them and empower them in the future. So if you're not familiar, however, adverse childhood experiences, this was a study, and they looked at physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. They looked at physical and emotional neglect, if the mother was treated violently in the home as the child was growing up, household substance abuse, was there household mental illness, parental separation or divorce, or an incarcerated household member. And the more that somebody checked off, filled out a questionnaire and said, yes, I've experienced this as a child, they linked that to health outcomes and what people would experience as an adult. And the more ACEs that somebody had, the more yes answers people had to these items, the worse their health outcomes were, such as if you have 2 or 3 or more, you are at greater risk of developing an issue with substance use, an issue with heart disease, and cancer was an increased risk. If you have, I believe it was 5 or more, you are your life expectancy drops by 20 years. And so, as I'm sure is a theme in the other workshops and the keynotes, we think about how we can protect our youth and what we can do to help them do better, feel better, and that we can empower them to be healthier. So what are some of the signs and symptoms of traumatic stress in children? You'll notice, we'll read through these pretty quickly because I want to have time for questions and comments at the end, and I want to go over some of the ways we can help as well. You'll notice some of these definitely overlap with the warning signs and symptoms of mental illness. And that's because so many of our youth have already been impacted by trauma, traumatic stress, toxic stress. And these signs and symptoms don't have to appear, they don't always appear a day or two after a traumatic event. They can show up months after sometimes, or if somebody has been told about or witnessed a traumatic event, they don't have to experience it themselves. So for preschool age children, some of what we see is they may feel helpless and uncertain, or they may be fearful of being separated from their caregiver. They may cry and or scream a lot more than usual or what they used to. They may have a poor appetite. They may not eat well. You may see a loss in weight. You may see regression. Are they returning to bedwetting or using baby talk? Developing new fears. They may have nightmares. Each age range handles and works through and processes traumatic stress differently. One way Preschool children that do that is by recreating the trauma through play. That's how at that developmental stage, their brain is processing it. They might play and recreate this over and over again as they're trying to work through it. They may not be developing to the next growth stage. They might have behavioral changes. They might ask questions about death, questions that you might not be expecting from somebody in preschool. Elementary school children, they may become anxious and fearful after the event. They may worry about their own or others' safety. They may become clingy with a parent or a teacher, somebody that they trust. They may feel guilt or shame about the event, especially or even though there may be nothing to feel guilty or shameful about, but they just might be carrying that within them. Instead of playing and recreating the event, they might tell others about the traumatic event over and over again, because that's how in that stage, their brain is trying to figure out what happened and process it and heal. They may become upset or overly upset if they get a small bump or bruise. They may have a hard time concentrating or experience numbness, have fears that the event will happen again, have difficulty sleeping, show changes in school performance, or become easily startled. They may jump or cry if a loud noise happens. Middle and high school children, they may feel depressed and alone, like they're the only ones who have felt this way or experienced what they experienced, and that nobody else really understands or gets them. They may discuss the traumatic events in detail and analyze it based on their developmental stage. They may go over it with like a fine-tooth comb. What happened? What happened then? Oh, I noticed this, and try to piece it together. They're at a greater risk of developing eating disorders and self-harming behaviors such as cutting. They may engage in risk-taking behaviors such as starting to use or abuse alcohol or substances. They may become sexually active, feel like they're going crazy and that they're different from everyone else. They may take too many risks trying to cope, have sleep disturbances. They may not want to go to the place that reminds them of the event if it was a physical event. They may say they have no feeling about the event. They're indifferent to it. They don't feel anything one way or another. And then they may show changes in their behavior, as we've seen with the warning signs we talked about before. So now that we've gone over all of the definitions and barriers and protective and risk factors and all of these warning signs, now here's the part where we discuss how can you help? What can you do in your role? You may be an educator or work in an organization. You may be a parent who's concerned about your own child and wondering, what can I do? So these two slides are some of the ways that you can help, especially if you're in a position where you're working with youth or you are an educator, you're in the school system. Know who you can turn to in your school and community. Does where you work or your school, do you have a protocol in place for identifying a student with a mental health concern or who is possibly suicidal or engaging in self-harm behaviors? You're concerned. Where do you go? Your school, if you are in a school setting, your school has a policy in place, has a protocol in place for a chain of command to follow. Is it guidance, a guidance counselor, a school social worker, a psychologist that you refer them to? Do you refer them to administration? Is there in your organization, Who do you call or follow up with? Or is this something that you're tasked with identifying and then following up by making a community referral? We'll go over some of the resources in here as well in a few slides. The resources that I have are specific to Sullivan County as well as some national lines. And so I encourage you, if you're not aware of your own community's resources, please look into, please look up wherever you can go for help with this. And I encourage your youth to access school and community mental health supports. If you're not their parent and you need to speak with their parent, encourage them to access that next step. Here are some resources that you can connect with right away. Maybe you're the right person to help them make that phone call if it seems daunting for them, or they're might be saying, oh, well, I've never done that before. I'm not sure what to do. Express concern using I statements, and we'll go over what those look like next. But I say I statements because a lot of youth hear you statements. They generally hear, you need to do this. You don't do that. You need to go here next. And it's a lot of adults talking at them. And so when we express concern, we want them to feel open to the dialogue and not defensive. So we want to use I statements. We want to encourage students to verbalize their emotions and put names to them, identify them, articulate them. Refrain from using stigmatizing language. Think when you're speaking about somebody living with a mental illness and what language you're using. Just a simple change in phrase or rewording can make a difference in somebody feeling comfortable opening up for the first time about what they're going through. And take time to take care of yourself as well. I know a lot of these workshops that I've done have, I've heard that there's a lot of talk from everywhere, especially in the media, in organizations, in schools, where they throw around the word self-care. But do we ever really define it or see how we can do this in a practical way without just adding one more thing onto your to-do list that's already so busy, I imagine? And so we'll go over that a bit as well. We have just under 15 minutes, so I'm being mindful of that as well. And some more ways you can help are by paying attention to these warning signs. If this is your child, talk to your child's doctor, their school nurse, or another healthcare provider to see if they need further evaluation, to get that conversation started. Because sometimes these signs and symptoms, it can be a mental health challenge. It might also be something physical going on. So if you speak with your child's pediatrician or you refer the youth you're working with back to their doctor, they can check out if it is something physical, or if it's part of their normal every day, if it's their part of their teen development, their childhood development, because that can get confusing as well. And encourage your children to talk about their concerns and emotions. A lot of that can look like, no matter what role you're in, it can be a role model to talk about your own feelings, because youth are always looking at the adults around them to see how we're handling situations. So are we able to regulate our own emotions? Are we able to handle conflict in a healthy way and communicate well with those around us? Are we able to express ourselves? Children often mirror that. When they do open up and tell you how they're feeling, listen and respect their feelings. We want to validate what they're going through. Help the children you're working with or your own children build strong, caring relationships, whether that's helping them build social skills, whether that's helping them make those connections so that in a group setting, so that they can foster their own friendships and connections on their own if they just need that nudge. Help children and youth develop self-esteem so that they feel good about themselves, that they feel empowered and confident to make good decisions, to make positive decisions for their lives. Create a safe and positive home environment. What does that look like? Does that look like changing the way that we speak in our house, or we speak with our partner, that we speak to our children? Does that mean we might look up a class after this to take on how we can make this a more positive environment? How can we focus on the specific skills that you're looking to focus on? If you're looking to speak about mental health with your child or the youth that you're working with for the first time, it can be confusing. It can feel a bit awkward. That's fair. That's pretty normal. And so it can be helpful to have some of these talking points to start with. It sounds like you are feeling blank about this situation. You can fill in with whatever you're observing. It sounds like you're feeling frustrated about this situation, or whatever that feeling is, because they'll either tell you yes or no. It's either, oh yes, I am feeling frustrated. You get it. It's now you're aligned with what they're feeling. You understand it. You see it. That helps them be more open and apt to talk to you about it. If they're not, that's okay too, because it still opens that dialogue. And that's the important thing. Is sounds like you're feeling frustrated about this situation. No, I'm not feeling frustrated. I'm feeling disappointed instead. Or if they don't know, it's, I am not feeling frustrated. I don't know what I'm feeling, but it's not frustration. Well, that's okay, because that just narrowed it down by one. Now that still opened the door to say, okay, so let's talk about what you are experiencing. It's okay to not know right now, but let's talk about it. Maybe we can come up with it. Maybe we can identify it, or maybe we could figure out the situation that might have caused those feelings. I statements, like I talked about in the last slide, I noticed that. I hear what you're saying. I care about you. I'm concerned about you. Those open up the dialogue where you let them know that you're hearing them. You're in this conversation. You're saying your observations, not making a judgment on the observations, just what I observed. And, I can follow that up with a question. I noticed that you seem a bit disappointed about this, or that you threw your book bag when you got home. What's going on? What happened today? Mental health affects everyone. We all have mental health. It's part of our overall health, as we said in the definition portion. So we want our children to understand what mental health is, so that they know it's not a taboo term. It doesn't have to be. They can talk with us about their mental health, that their mental health can be well, or it can be unwell. Be genuine. Kids can really tell so fast if you're not being genuine with them. And so we want to show that even if the conversation doesn't go how you said, or you don't have all the so-called right words to say, that they see that you care. And then what can I do to help? If they may not know, that's okay. But ask, what can I do to help? And if they say something and it's not in your scope of what you can do, see if you can find a person that can make that happen, or let them know what you're able to do. What matters to you? What's important to you? What is your why? These are just some examples of questions that you can ask your youth to open up more conversation than, oh, how was your day? How was school? Good, fine, it's okay. And then they leave. How can we say or identify what's going on? How are you feeling? What is your why? What's your motivation? What's getting you through to the next day, the next month, the next year? What's your why for doing things? Letting them know it's okay to not be okay. We don't have to be okay all the time. But the second part of that statement is that you don't have to stay that way. It's okay to not be okay, but you also don't have to stay that way. We can get you connected to help. Your feelings are valid. Now, when I say that, it doesn't make them right in the situation. It just means that how they're feeling is valid. You can talk afterward if you need to about what needs to change with their behavior or how they addressed a situation that wasn't okay. That's fine. But in that moment, how they're feeling, and youth feel things so big that we want to validate them. We might know that they're going to experience harder things later on, but what they're feeling right now, what they're going through is big to them. And we want to make sure we know that we hear that too. You are important. And some more questions are, when you were having a good day, what did you do? Because when somebody is going through some feelings where they're not doing okay, or they're not sure how to feel better, or how to get out of the mindset that they're in at the moment, they can't always think about their coping skills, what helps them handle situations well. And so if you ask something like, when you were having a good day, what did you do? What worked for you? I found that in my experience, youth tend to respond well to that and say, oh yeah, I can think of a few things. And then I like to follow it up with, well, then are you able to do those now? If when you were having a good day, you rode your bike, are you able to go ride your bike now? Oh yeah, I can do that. And they weren't thinking of that before, but now they can. They realize they can do something. And so we want to just start that dialogue and see what will work for them in the moment. Another one, what's your hashtag? It kind of goes back to, what is your why? We think about how they want to be thought of, what they want to do in the future, or what drives them. And so we have time to just go over some of the community resources. And so, as I said before, some of these are particular to Sullivan County, but we also do have some for national, and that will also be applicable to your own communities. We have some of the mental health clinics in Sullivan County: Choices Mental Health Counseling, the Sullivan County Behavioral Health Clinic, NAMI Sullivan County. NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and many counties, Orange County has one as well. We have different branches and local affiliates. They are a great resource for friends, family, loved ones of individuals who are diagnosed with a mental illness, and they provide advocacy, social support groups, and they also, the Sullivan County affiliate offers the only suicide bereavement support group in Sullivan County. The ARC of Sullivan Orange Counties runs a children's mobile crisis intervention line overnight, and so want to be mindful that that is another resource. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, It is a national number, but based on your area code, they'll route you to the most local one. And the most local ones here are in Dutchess and Orange counties. So they are aware of all the local resources that they can connect you with. Crisis text line. You would text connect to 741-741. The New York youth line specifically is the same number, but you just text the keyword got5, GOT, and then the number 5, and that will connect you with trained individuals who are skilled with speaking with youth about what they're going through. Rehabilitation Support Services is a local nonprofit in multiple counties across the Hudson Valley, and they offer a variety of services, group homes, as well as respite services if somebody is going through a non-medical crisis and needs to de-escalate, calm down away from their home setting. Sullivan County Mobile Mental Health serves adults if you're working with a parent who has a mental health crisis. Synergy and Kathleen Christie, they are also a licensed clinical social worker and another mental health clinic. And then the last two before Maura jumps back in is the Trevor Project, which is they have a chat feature online, a phone number, and a texting number listed there. They support people, youth specifically in the LGBTQ plus community who need support, especially with mental health crises, including suicide. And then the Children's Home of Wyoming Conference provides a variety of services in Sullivan County and support to families and children who are at risk of or are currently displaced in the foster care system. So thank you so much.
Jenny, wow, thank you so much. That was incredible information. What a great, wonderful workshop. I would like to, I'm just going to include here in the chat some links. If you would like to receive some CTLE credits, the link is going to be attached here. I've also attached a survey, and I would like to thank everybody for attending. And before you go, please use that survey. And also, I'd like to remind you all that next year's Growing Resilience webinar series that takes place every second Thursday of the month from 3:30 to 4:30, except for in February, which will be on the first Thursday will happen from January to May. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers, including Dr. Ken Ginsberg, who is an internationally known expert in the field of youth and resilience. And thank you all again for joining us on this conference, and we hope to see you again next year. And special thank you to Jenny for a fabulous presentation. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.